Thank you, choir. Before we go any further in our service, I'd be remiss not to offer you the opportunity for a few more of your prayers. One, that our lead pastor, David Emery, is on assignment in Ireland. Actually, he's on vacation with his wife and son. And our youth are on a mission trip in central Oklahoma with our youth director, Colt Stubblefield. Here's an image of them there. And so I would enjoy inviting you to have prayers for their well-being, that they would serve as Christ's hands and feet, and for travel mercies for all of them, that they would come back safely to us from the places that they are this day. As we continue on this day, we are continuing on in a Lenten series that we are entitling Hunger and Thirst. And in it, we are looking at the ways that Jesus provides us with a sustenance that quenches our true thirst and provides us from our true hunger, that we are prepared to receive the gifts of Christ as they are given to us in this journey through Lent to Easter. And if you haven't already picked up one of our Lenten devotional guides, we have those. It's not too late. I hope you will do that. You can find a copy that we would love to give to you, again, at our welcome desks that are outside of this space. In it, you'll find some great opportunities and prompts for your own personal reflection on Scripture, but also some study questions for groups in the back. And we would always encourage you together in whatever format you choose and to speak about these things and wrestle with them as community. For today, the message is going to be offered is actually from one of the texts in that devotional guide for this week. And it is the story of Jesus walking on water. Perhaps one of the most widespread illustrations as the phrase walking on water finds its way into our common language. But the story is recorded in 3 of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and John. But it is here in the 14th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew that we find the most detailed account of it. And it takes place just after Jesus and the disciples have fed 5,000, and now Jesus has sent the disciples in the boat. So I'm going to read the scripture now. I tried to do it without a Bible at the first service. Can you imagine how that went? So listen now and be curious about what it is you hear. Is there a word of good news that God is speaking to you this day? Here begins the reading. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got back into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Here ends the reading. And what did you hear? I have to tell you, I have heard my fair share of sermons on this particular story, and a lot of them come down to an appreciation for Peter's faith to assume the risk of getting out of the boat and walking towards Jesus. Oh, what courage that took, we say. And if only he had kept his eyes trained on Jesus, because if we get distracted, if our faith falters, well, then we too will be in the same situation as Peter, crying out for the Lord to save us. And so the message concludes: take courage, step out in faith, and keep your eyes focused on Jesus. Shortest sermon ever. And if you intend to try to walk on water, that is all really solid advice. But it would be a shame if I stood up here this morning and didn't offer you another option for keeping your head above the waves. So, before you go out to the nearest body of water to test your faith and the laws of buoyancy, let me give you that option. Just stay in the boat. Well, seriously. I think if we don't include that as an option, we may miss some important truths that this scripture has to tell us about who God is and this faith that we claim. So today, I want to weigh our options. To stay in the boat or not stay in the boat, that is today's question. And I think the best place to begin is to try to get our minds around why Peter is in this position in the first place. What did the story say? Well, it said that the disciples were prevented from making forward progress by the winds and the wave. Now, mind you, most of these men, including Peter, were professional fishers on that same body of water by trade before Jesus encouraged them to drop their nets and become his disciples. And so they knew the wind and the waves. They also knew what a fool's errand it would be to take your boat while it was wavy into the shore and risk hitting things or dashing it against the rocks. No, I don't know that these disciples were necessarily fearful of the waves like they were in a previous story when Jesus calms a storm and it says that they were terrified for their lives. But we can assume that they were definitely stuck out there, weary of the waves and having to play the waiting game. And isn't that frustrating? I remember just a few weeks ago when Jody and I were making our weekly run to the store that we were in a particularly pressed for time. And in an effort to expedite the process, we decided we would divide and conquer. She to the groceries, I would go to the home goods. We would find a regrouping point at the dairy section before being on our way. A perfectly good plan until I ditched it. Well, you see, I got to the dairy section early, which was unusual because Jody's always there first. And so I waited and waited and waited. It must have been like a whole 90 seconds. And then in my impatience, I decided that I would just set off to find my collaborator in whatever aisle that she was in. And you know how this went, right? Here I go, looking down every aisle, trying to find her all the way to one end of the store and back, only to return to where I began to find Jody in front of the milk, waiting patiently for me with the deserving welcome, "What took you so long?" And I would like to tell you that was an isolated incident. But the truth is, I am of the personality that the waiting game is very challenging. And I don't think I'm the only one in that boat this morning. Now, whether it's because of frustration or boredom, or we are weary about our life circumstances in this season, it is never fun and always challenging to wait. I think we fail to appreciate just how difficult that is, especially if it is God that we are waiting on. But back to our story, because the disciples are not only stuck waiting out there, but it also says that they are afraid, for they see this figure walking toward them on the water. A ghost is a reasonable thought. I'm trying to get my mind around being out on the lake at somewhere between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. and seeing a figure walking towards me on the surface. I'm pretty sure you would hear my screams here all the way from Keystone Lake. But despite Jesus' proclamation to them that it is he who is approaching, well, Peter's just going to need some extra assurances. And at this point in the story, what strikes me is how much like this we are. And whether we're in a season of stuckness, weary from waiting, or we look out at the horizon and we are terrified by what we see coming our way, the reality is we all want some assurances. We want a peace of mind. We want to find joy in the midst of our suffering. We want to be reminded that our life has meaning and purpose. Should I say that perhaps we're searching for God? And what evidence, what proof do we need to assure ourselves that a good and loving God is close by? Well, for Peter, he seemed to have in his mind that being able to walk on water would be the evidence that he needed. I'm not sure why he thinks that walking on the water will prove that that is Jesus. Perhaps getting out on the water would be the courageous thing that would make him take faith. Or perhaps he would finally believe in Jesus' promises if God would just let him do this. Or maybe even closer to home, he would finally believe in himself and look past his shortcomings if he could do what Jesus could. And whatever the case, the question, Lord, if it is you, is it you, Jesus? Oh, we need to know. How will we know that you are always with us even to the end of time? Friends, how do you know that God is close at hand in your life? Well, based on the scripture, I'm guessing the answer to that isn't that you're going to be walking on water anytime soon. Sure, you may feel some days like you can walk on water or could, and that's a great feeling. And walking on water is probably a good exercise for humbling ourselves and reminding us that we are not Jesus and that we don't necessarily have to do all that God can. I'm not saying that we as people of faith aren't called and asked to do amazing things, miraculous things. Remember, this story takes place just after Jesus and the disciples performed the miracle of feeding 5,000 people with mere table scraps. What I'm saying is those amazing things we're asked to do are never only for ourselves alone. And besides that, somewhere in this good book, I reminded that in the New Testament there are several other times in the Greek where the language that gets translated, if it is you, is used. And in every one of those times, a character is trying to press, to test, to confirm Jesus' identity as God. It's never a good thing. But in this case, Jesus acquiesced to the request. Peter, you want to walk on water? Come on. And it's easy to criticize from dry land, but Peter steps out of the boat, and would you know that he walks on water for a while? What a feeling. But we're told that also he becomes distracted, fearful of the waves, it says, and he loses his what? Confidence? Trust? Faith? Adrenaline? Or whatever the case, down he goes, and in this moment is here that Jesus' true identity shows up. And it is here that the assurances that Peter needed to take out in faith and claim that God was close enough to save him. Lord, save me, he cries out. And would you believe that is exactly what Jesus does? It's only at this point that Peter is asked the question by Jesus, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Why did you doubt that you couldn't walk on water? Or why did you doubt enough that you're out here in this dangerous situation in the first place? Whatever the reason, it is in the rescuing of Peter that everybody in the story realizes the true identity of Jesus, that God is truly close at hand, and upon entry into the boat, they worship him for the first time in the Gospel of Matthew as the Son of God. Okay, if you're with me to this point, which I hope you are, I promise to deliver on an answer. Do we stay in the boat? Do we get out of the boat? And I think that's a really important question to ask. Because here's the reality. Here we are, a community in our little boat, precariously perched along the waters of danger and chaos and turmoil of this world that we live in. And oftentimes it feels like the wind is against us, that everything is pushing, that there is no forward progress to be made. We look out at the horizon and we're fearful of what we see is coming our way. And we long for those assurances, for that peace of mind, to find joy, to find purpose and meaning. We want assurances, proof that God is close by and willing to help us. And so we can set out and search. And that's okay. But before you go searching through all the podcasts, through all the hypnosis sessions, through astrology, through studying charts, through getting in touch with the life you lived before you were born, and before you go on this grand search down every aisle that this world has to offer about happiness or joy or how to find your journey, let me just rest you assured that whether you choose to stay in the boat or not, I believe that God will find you. Because as you're searching, well, God is searching for you. And should you find yourself in a precarious situation beyond where you can stay afloat, well, God does not intend to let you drown in the mire. And that, my friends, that's the gospel. Will you pray with me? Lord, where can we go from your presence? When trouble is in our way, you are already there. And so whether we rise on the wings above or if we settle by the sea, we know that your hand is close by to catch us should we find ourselves failing, should we find ourselves in those seasons of doubt. And so we name now the positions of stuckness we find ourselves in, the things that make us fearful. And we ask this week that we be reassured of your presence and know that you, through Jesus Christ, are not only our rock, but our floaty too. Amen.